Olá, eu sou a Tamy do LiteraTamy e hoje eu estou com a Oyinkan Braithwaite, que escreveu Minha Irmã, a Serial Killer. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's a great honor. And I also want to thank Kapulana Publishing House for this opportunity. And well, almost every time I interview an author, I like to ask them what are their books about, because I really believe the writers can reveal a lot about their books when they talk about them. So could you please introduce My Sister Serial Killer and tell us how its idea came up for you?
My Sister the Serial Killer is about two sisters. The older sister, Correta, is meticulous, she's hardworking, she's very straight-laced. The younger sister, Ayala, is charming, she's beautiful, and she also happens to be a serial killer. For the most part, when this story starts, Ayala has killed her third boyfriend, and every time she kills, she calls her sister, oh my gosh, this thing has just happened, you know, this guy is dead, I don't know. And Correta runs over to help her get rid of the evidence so that she doesn't get into trouble. And you know, the story really gets to a head when Ayala starts to date the guy that Correta is in love with. So that's my...
And how did the idea come?
Oh yes, so in 2007 I was researching the Black Widow spider. I don't remember why I was doing that, but that's when I learned that the female spider is a little bit bigger than the male spider, and after they mate, if she's hungry and he's still there, she'll eat him. And I thought that was really funny, and I kind of, it made a huge impression on me. So I wrote a poem called Black Widow Spider, and not too long after that I wrote another poem about this idea of a more traditional Black Widow, a woman who marries wealthy men, poisons them, inherits their wealth, and keeps doing that. And in that poem, the only person who knew what she was doing was her friend, who was a lot less attractive than she was. But the friend keeps it secret. She wasn't involved, but she keeps it secret. But then the beautiful one, you know, attracts this man that the less attractive friend also falls in love with. And, you know, she's afraid because she knows what her friend is going to do. So the story it was a poem, but the poem in the middle and the end was very different from this. I feel like those two poems laid the foundation for this story. So I didn't really visit it until 10 years later when I started writing this book.
So you didn't publish the poem?
I did, you know, but I don't talk about that. I don't talk about, no, because I published when I was 19, I published a collection of poetry. So it was those poems and a bunch of other poems. But I'm kind of embarrassed about that book now. There are maybe 5 poems in that whole book that are any good. The rest are just rubbish, and I self-published it. So I was working at the time, and I used like my savings to self-publish it and all of that. So I don't talk about it. We don't talk about that book.
Okay. So the title of your book brings us the idea of a thriller. But when we read it, we realize that's actually more a novel that is focused on the progression of the characters' personalities and relationships more than on the crimes or tensions that we usually see on thrillers and things like that. In fact, I really think that your book offer us much more than a thriller could do. I'd like to know 2 things. 1, do you consider your book a thriller? And 2, how did you decide for this title, and how do you feel it affects the reader's reading?
Okay, when I was writing it, I didn't put it in any genre. I didn't think about genre. I just knew it was about 2 women, you know, one of them is killing men, and it's about their relationship, like you said, and I didn't worry about where it would fit, mostly because I didn't think I was going to get it published. I didn't think anybody would buy into it. So even this book I self-published at first because I didn't think anybody would, like the first chapter only has 2 sentences. Like I didn't think that an agent or a publisher would be like this, I figured they would be like, what is she doing? So I did it for myself. I did it mostly for myself. So I didn't have to worry about those things I would normally think about. I didn't have to think, oh, is it going to be, do I tell them it's crime? Do I tell them? I didn't have to worry about any of that, which was really fantastic actually to not have to think about those things. The title, my agent chose the title. So when I self-published it, I didn't self-publish it as My Sister the Serial Killer. But when I eventually ended up sending it to an agent, which is a whole other story, she named it My Sister the Serial Killer. And at first, I was a little bit worried because I thought, oh, people are going to think it's true crime. And, they might not. And I have had people say, oh, before they read it, they were like, this book isn't for me. And, gosh, it's going to be so bloody. And, there's going to be a lot of like stabbings and stuff. But then they said they read it and they realized it wasn't anything like that. But I'm so glad I listened to my agent as well, because what the title does is it makes people look at the book again. It's kind of you're like, oh, hang on a minute, what's that? And the title in combination with the cover, usually draws people in. And for the most part, even this, the Kapulana cover, you can sort of tell from the cover that it's not that serious. There's something fun and playful about it. So I think it's definitely an effective title, and I think it tells you what the book is. Like it's very direct, so okay, it's about sisters and it's about one of them is a serial killer. So it makes my job really easy when people are like, what's your book about? I'm like, it's what it says. So yeah.
The leading thread of the story is the relationship between sisters, which works as a balance. I mean, one of them is stunningly attractive, charming, she's really pretty, while the other is just average or even seen as ugly sometimes. On the other hand, the most beautiful sister is also the one that awakes the ugliest feelings, that puts in evidence all the mess and ugliness of death, while the ugly one is responsible for the cleanliness, the aesthetic feeling of order. So for me, that means they're characters who works by contrast, not only in an external way, but also internally. What is outside them not necessarily agrees with what is inside them. I'd like to know about their construction. When you thought about them too, did you immediately define they would work like that, in contrast? Did they appear to you together since the very start? And would they be able to exist like that, one without the other, as independent characters?
When I was working, the poem I told you about previously, the one about the 2 friends. So when I started this book, I knew I had the 2 friends, like, because it's a similar story, except the how the story develops is different, but it's a similar idea. So I was like, okay, 2 friends, one of them is murdering, and then I thought, no, I don't want them to be friends. I want them to be sisters, because, like I said in the poem, the less attractive friend wasn't involved she just knew it was happening. But in this one, she is involved. She has to clean up. And I thought, would you do that for a friend? Like, most of us wouldn't, but like, family is you can choose who your friends are, you can't choose who your family, you're kind of stuck with them. And there's a lot of that in this book, where Korede feels weighed down by duty and by responsibility and by love, but a lot of it is she doesn't feel like she has a choice because it's her sister. And I've come across a lot of readers who have said, yeah, they would do anything for their sister or their brother. Like, that's the person you would risk incarceration for or whatever, I guess. So the 2 of them did come to me together, because I knew, okay, they're sisters and all that. How I constructed them, so Ayala, again, because of the poems, I already had this idea of a woman who who doesn't really care about men, who's reckless, like from the spider, because the spider, the thing, what fascinated me about the spider is that the male spider isn't her natural prey. I feel like she's not supposed to eat him. Like, you know, she's supposed to wait till like a fly comes or something. So there's something really reckless and cruel and careless, you know, about that. And that's what Ayola is. Also, I watch a lot of Japanese anime, and there are a lot of like weird, quirky characters in anime, and anime is what sort of taught me that you can make a two-dimensional character work. So when it came to Ayala, to me, Ayala is kind of like a two-dimensional character, but what makes her feel like a three-dimensional character is because, like you said, her characteristics are really contrasting. So on the one hand, she's a serial killer, but on the other hand, she's like a child. She's open and she's free, and she doesn't really think about consequences or look into the future. And that's what gives her this feeling of being a rounded character. Korede, I spent a little more time on because obviously Korede is also the narrator of the story, but I did use one to build the other. So because Ayala is flighty, Korede has to be stable, you know, because Ayala is childlike, Korede has to be almost like a parent. And, you know, then the beauty as well was one of the most important things to me, because part of what I wanted to do with this story was look at how society treats you based on how you are on the outside affects how you develop, how your character develops on the inside, how your personality develops. You know how like when guys, and maybe girls as well, who are maybe on the big side, and you know, I've come across like guys who say, oh, they developed, they're funny because they, you know, so that people, they got people laughing before people could laugh at them, you know, where they end up developing that part of their personality. They end up with this funny joke. They can laugh at themselves, so it doesn't hurt them when you laugh at them or when you make fun of their size, because they're able to mock themselves and mock everybody else. And that's not something that an attractive guy has to learn. That's not a skill you have to hone if you're really, really attractive. And I just find things like that interesting. A woman who's been told from when she was very young that she's attractive walks into a room and knows she has a certain kind of power. But if you know that you're not attractive, you need to develop another skill to make up for it. So that's part of what interests me with these characters and why they needed to be so different physically.
That's great. And that is stronger because they're sisters, so she's all her life she has dealt with
comparison. Yeah, and it's something that because I've got two sisters and a brother, and there was a point where, you know, now and again my sisters would say something to me and I think, oh my gosh, like I remember, you know, my younger sister was like, I was always compared to the two of you, you know, and I've been compared to the one after me, and she's probably been compared, and it's interesting how it affected us. And I had this auntie say to me, she was like, oh my gosh, you used to be the most beautiful of the three girls, but all of a sudden she was like, the one after me, she was like, she's just taken over, she's just left you behind. And I remember I didn't say anything, but I remember thinking, oh my gosh, am I less attractive? Is she more attractive? What does that mean? How does that, what does that change? Does it matter? You know, I had to think about it because I hadn't thought about it before. You know, I was just me, and, you know, my sisters were just my sisters. But all of a sudden I'm like, you know, am I less attractive? Was I more attractive before? And, you know, and then you've got to figure out if that matters to you and how you're going to handle it going forward. And truly something had changed, because all of a sudden, when my sister and I were together, guys would just walk past me and they would just like head directly for her. And that took some adjusting, because even if you're not someone who really cares about stuff like that, you still have to adapt to the change, because there is a change. So I think that's really, really interesting.
The way our main character act is totally built according to their relationship with their father. And it's made in an amazing way, because even though their father has a huge part in all their conflicts, he's not exactly active anytime in the story. since the beginning, you already knew the father would play this role on their lives. How did you manage to achieve this balance, to create between two strong female characters, a male character whose presence is much more felt than seen, without having to use any appealing effect?
So when I was starting it and I realized that they were going to be sisters, at some point I still thought, no, that's not enough. So I decided I needed them to go through some kind of trauma, because I think that trauma creates like a kind of bubble where you and whoever else has experienced the trauma feel like nobody else can understand, and it creates like an even greater bond between, you know, whoever. It could be a group of friends or whatever, but when you've experienced a trauma that's unique, or you feel like it's unique, everybody else becomes an outsider almost. And I think that's what, to a great extent, is what's going on with Ayala and Korede, because even though Ayala has a lot of friends, Korede is the only one who's her confidant. Korede is the only one she really trusts. And, you know, Korede doesn't really have anybody, so she's forced to, you know, so her bond with Ayala is also really quite strong. And so knowing that they needed a trauma is at the point where the father came to me, because their father is their trauma. The father is the reason why they cling to each other. And developing him, I had to keep making him worse, because initially he wasn't. It was like, okay, you know, and a lot of it, like you said, it's not really clear sometimes what he does or what he doesn't do. But I did have to work on that a bit. There was the scene where he brings home another woman, and the mom has to deal with that, and the daughters are watching it. And I don't think that scene was in the first draft, if I remember correctly, but I remember when that scene came to me, it was like, okay, this is perfect. You know, like it messes with everybody all at once in a really horrifying way. I can only imagine what that would be like. I can't even imagine experiencing something like that. But yeah, when he came to me, and even like his character, I almost fell in love with him in a way, because he's so horrible. Like, but he charms everyone else. You know, he's only horrible to his family, to the outside, to the guests they have come in, to everybody else. Everybody else thinks he's the best thing ever. He's a great guy. He's, you know, but his family are the only ones who are aware that he's a demon, and more so his daughters, because I think his wife, their mom, is in denial to a great extent.
Yeah, and I think that he also affects the way the girls act with boys.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed their... To be honest, the thing about the dad, though, is there's a point where Korede says that he's the only guy she's come across who didn't treat Ayala differently based on the way she looked. So I think that in one respect, he was the only male really that didn't care whether she was attractive or not. He was just evil generally, but he did teach them. I think that's where their callousness comes from, especially Ayala, where she just doesn't care. And also the experience of having their dad almost give her away to another man taught her that, first of all, how attractive she was, but how men were willing to use that against her. And I guess in her mind, she jumps the gun before they get a chance to do that.
That's great. So I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really love to read your book.
Yeah.
It's a whole new experience for me, because I don't usually read books about serial killers, but it was awesome. And I hope I can read something more. Okay?
Thank you so much. I've had fun.
Então é isso, gente. Muito obrigada por ter assistido o vídeo até aqui. Se você gostou, não se esqueça de curtir. E eu vejo vocês no próximo vídeo. Tchau, tchau.